There we go.
The Wright High School graduate, went to IU, graduated in 1979. Went from there to Washington, D.C. and spent several years there. Worked in the Reagan administration in 1986. Returned home in 1991 and contributed to the Courier Press with articles until 2016. So he's been with us for quite a while, and he's the local authority on manufacturing in Evansville. And again, today, he'd like to speak on trends in shipbuilding in or naval construction of World War II. So, take it, Dave.
Hello? Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Sorry. I'm so blessed that all of you came out today. And I wanted to start by telling all of you that this is all new material for me, really. I didn't really know a whole lot about this topic when I discussed it with Mark Browning. But I've learned a lot, and I hope to convey what I've learned to all of you. Because obviously Evansville wasn't part of this story. Having one of the cornfield shipyards that produced 167 LSTs on 3 shipways, which is really pretty amazing when you think about it, in less than 3.5 years. This is just a little award of merit that the Maritime Commission would present to people for various meritorious actions in the realm of shipbuilding. We had the Maritime Commission, and we also had the United States Navy. And the Maritime Commission got underway earlier. In about 1938, the money started to be approved to start emergency shipbuilding, or building under the emergency program for the Maritime Commission. And so, you know, by Pearl Harbor, we were well underway. I mean, we were already starting to replace some of the shipping that had been destroyed by the Germans in the North Atlantic. So this is one of those early keels being laid for what was called a Liberty ship at the Todd Houston Emergency Shipyard, where some 209 ships were built on 6 shipways. And this is the Oregon Shipbuilding Yard. Celebrates the first launch of a Liberty ship, the Star of Oregon. And you know, the battle in the North Atlantic was well underway when we started building these ships. And many in Great Britain were frantic because they didn't feel like they could sustain the level of destruction and still stay afloat as a nation, basically, for all of the things that they needed to have imported. So this is the first ship that was built in the Oregon shipyard. And here was what they were attacking. This is a typical convoy in the North Atlantic, trudging its way across the ocean at a speed of 12 knots per hour. You have up to 45 ships within the convoy and perhaps 10 escort vessels around the perimeter, sometimes submarines, not often. Now, to give us some idea of the threat, I thought I'd show some of the ships that were being produced abroad. This one here is U-boat number 29, 28, and 30, all 3 of which were built and between 1935 and 1936 in the Krupp shipyard in Kiel. In November 1939, Admiral Rader warned Adolf Hitler that with only 3 new subs built by the following January, with the 8 recent losses, there would only be 15 operational submarines to go on patrol. This number would fall to 11 or less in early 1940. Nevertheless, during the period from 1940 to 1941, German subs sank over 270 ships. So that's a lot of shipping. Hitler's idea was that if he could destroy 750,000 tons of shipping every month for a year, that he could put England, or force England into a position where they would be forced to sign an armistice. That was his theory. But he never dreamed that we were going to do what we ended up doing. Now, this is a postcard that my dad brought back from Germany. It is the pocket battleship, the Admiral Graf Spee. And this is a ship being destroyed, protecting the beach at Cherbourg Harbor during the evacuation of British and French troops from Dunkirk. Now, this is a map that shows the early sinkings. And you see those perimeters around the eastern port and the eastern port of Greenland and around England. That shows the 300-mile diameter that a convoy could be protected by aircraft. But obviously there was a lot of wide open sea there, and consequently lots of opportunities for destroying shipping. From September 39 until June 40, German U-boats and surface ships destroyed some 2.3 million tons of shipping. During July 40 and December 40, they destroyed an additional 2.5 million tons of shipping. And many of them were in those areas where air power could not be projected beyond because it was out of the range. It's where a lot of those, where the convoys could not be escorted by protected by aircraft. Then this is later. This is the 1st of August 42 to the 21st of May of 43. By that time, the Germans were up to about 3.6 million tons every 6 months. It was an incredible situation, and it seemed as if the lower the number of submarines that they could put in the ocean or put on patrol, the more ships they killed. They destroyed. It was just amazing because there was incredible attrition. We started getting good at destroying submarines, identifying where they were and blowing them up. But that really didn't turn around until 1943. And then it just kind of turned around all at once. This is one of the closest guarded secrets of World War II. You see in that little inset photograph that the HMS Bulldog actually boarded U-110. And in doing so, they captured an Enigma machine. And one of the rotor setting manuals that told them how the rotors were supposed to be set on what date so that they could make the thing make sense. And the Enigma and the manual immediately went to Bletchley Park, and that's how they cracked the German code. And this took place May 1941, still before we were in the war. They had sent the Enigma to the cryptologist. And the accompanying map is a battle plan that the British had come up with to attack the wolf pack. And out of that came the capture of U-110. Now, this is the Japanese battleship Yamato. 60,000 tons. It had 20-inch guns in those huge turrets. It was the largest battleship that the Japanese made. Its sister ship was called the Musashi. And ironically, these two ships were built in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Yamato was destroyed and sunk, but the Musashi survived the war. But I just thought that was a little ironic little twist that you see in history all the time, and I thought I'd share that with you. Now, this is the Japanese aircraft carrier Hiryu, the Flying Dragon. It participated in the Pearl Harbor attack, Wake Island, supported the Dutch East Indian Campaign, and bombed Darwin, Australia, before being destroyed herself at the Battle of Midway. It was one of the four that the dauntless dive bombers. Now, here is an important fact. This is a plan of a proposed German aircraft carrier. And this came out of a book of excerpts from Das Auge, which was the Nazi party, the Luftwaffe propaganda arm. And I have this book at home, and this was apparently an article that appeared in that magazine in probably 40 or 41. But as it turned out, the Germans never built one single solitary aircraft carrier. They focused all their efforts on submarines and enormous surface ships that they built in the mid-30s. Of course, the destruction of the USS Arizona at the hands of the Imperial Japanese Navy and Air Fleet kind of changed things a little bit. And this was becoming the scene in literally dozens of cities on both coasts and up and down the inland waterways, the Ohio River, and also Sturgeon Bay and the Great Lakes had shipyards. But these are coastal. This particular is at Richmond in California, showing roofs that gave weather protection for workers constructing sub-assemblies. I would imagine it was pretty hot. Now, these are 4 pictures of workers in the shipyards. The upper left, you see a man welding on a hull. Next to that are men riveting. World War II was the first time that welding had taken the place of riveting, of affixing steel together for shipbuilding purposes. It was a new and untried method of shipbuilding, but they thought they could get it to work. And then this man on the lower left has a white hot rivet, which he transfers from the heat there to the working surface to be pounded into the ship. And then on the right There is a flat piece of steel that has just emerged from a furnace, and it's about to be formed out there on a form. Now here we have the Jones-Brunswick yard in Brunswick, Georgia. Had 6 shipways and is an example of straight line flow with maximum space between the plate shop and the shipway. And the shipways, you see the plate shop is down here in the foreground. Lots of space there in between, and the ships go out through the shipways. Now this yard has what's called a turning flow. This is Marine ship at Sausalito, California. And you see how the shipyard hugs the shore. That was one of the largest shipyards operated by Kaiser. Kaiser was a major shipbuilding, but I have a graph later that identifies others. Now this is a shift change taking place between the gantry cranes at North Carolina Shipbuilding in Wilmington, North Carolina. Here are apprentice women practicing the cutting of steel plate with acetylene torches. Women comprise 30% of the shipyard workers across the country, and actually 40% of the workforce here at Evansville, making the same amount of money as the men at $1.40 an hour. Now, these are 2 different images to show what was, notice these little cottages along here, and what that ultimately, what that became. And this is at Cushing Point, South Portland, Maine, in July of 1941 is the top picture. And the summer cottages got crowded out by all of this. And it's the Todd Bath East area in the background. Below is the crowded west area in April of 1942. You can see there was a huge difference in what they did there. Now, this new welding technique, not everything was perfect, especially when it came to building tankers. You know, at this time we were building Victory ships and tankers that were just kind of general purpose cargo vessels. But this was the Schenectady that was built at New York Shipbuilding. And in the middle of the night, while it was very cold, it developed this huge crack down the side of the hull. And believe it or not, this was able to be fixed. They were able to fix this and put this tanker back in operation. This happened with a number of different of these kinds of ships. And I found this picture, which I thought was incredibly dramatic. This is also at New York Shipbuilding, and this is the USS San Jacinto, which is an Independence class aircraft carrier. And my uncle, Bill Hoofnagel, actually served on this ship. And it also happens to be the ship that then Lieutenant George Bush flew a TVF Avenger off of this aircraft carrier. And during the Battle of Chichijima, I believe, his aircraft was shot, and he was able to get the thing out over the ocean. Unfortunately, his 2 other crew members did not survive jumping out of the airplane with parachutes, but he did survive and was picked up by a submarine. And this is a picture of San Jacinto off of the Philadelphia Navy Yard in January of '44. But they're kind of odd-looking ships. They did not have armor plate, and therefore they were quite vulnerable to enemy attack. Now, as I said, we wouldn't be able to talk about this without having at least a few pictures from the Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron Shipyard here in Evansville. And here you see ships 3, 4, and 5 under construction, probably after October 31st, 1942. And notice they only still really had one operational way to slip these ships into the river. But this is a little bit later. You see the ways and the ramp, and in the background you see there was room over there for about 8 additional ships where they could be outfitting the vessels that had the hulls were okay. Now this is a wooden diorama, and this is actually at LST 325 in the gift shop. When I first became a volunteer down there, somebody just showed up with it one day. And it's one of the few artifacts that actually came from Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron that was actually there. As you probably know, there was a big fire there in 1946 and practically everything was destroyed. And this is the launching of LST 492 during the Third War Loan, and you can see thousands of people with a symbol on the waterfront. And the Wrights High School band would sometimes be asked to play here in the band box, believe it or not. Now, what did we build? What was actually being constructed in all these shipyards? Well, right here you see variants of the Victory, or the Liberty ship, which was the first of the 2 major kinds of cargo ships that we built in this country. And the one at the top is called a C3. It was the largest and the speediest of the Liberties. And then I think the other 2 are tankers. Now, this is the Essex class carrier. Intrepid in the Philippine Sea on November, I keep doing that, 1944. 27,000 tons. It could travel 33 knots. It carried 82 aircraft and about 250,000 gallons of aviation fuel. So they were formidable, and 7 of these were actually used in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Here we see Victory ships being produced, and you see the growth of the merchant fleet. One symbol equals pre-war fleet of 6,850,000 deadweight tons. What does that mean? That means that in 1942, the United States shipyards, and that's largely before we were even in World War II, we built more shipping than currently carried the American flag in 1939. Think of that. We built more shipping in 1 year than what had pre-existed during the Depression. And then you see the graph grows, and all of that went both to the Pacific and to the Atlantic. And this is what the beautiful Victory ship looked like. It was larger, it could carry more tonnage, and I thought this was a particularly attractive photograph that would show the Red Oak Victory. Not only did they make ships out of steel, and by the way, that was a big deal, because we had an economy that had been in depression for 10 years. And we had a lot of steel making capacity, but it was mothballed because of the depression. And it took capital investment to just get those steel mills back operating so that they had enough steel to be able to build the ships. And during this whole procedure, when they were trying to figure out how they were going to allocate steel to all the various different, it became a political issue because of so much money was going into New England. And they finally decided that, there was a shipyard. The guy that made Higgins boats, I'll talk about Higgins boats later, but Andrew Higgins lived in New Orleans, and he wanted to start a huge shipyard to build Liberty ships in New Orleans. And during the negotiations, it was finally decided that they couldn't produce enough steel to be able to ship it down there to New Orleans so that he could build ships down there. So they canceled the contract. And that was very controversial because so many people were continuing to be unemployed in New Orleans, in the New Orleans area, from depression. So anyway, this happens to be a ship that was made out of concrete. This is in Tampa Bay, Florida. And now we have another one. This was built by concrete ships constructors in National City, California. So there were several companies that were making these ships out of concrete, and they were used primarily to handle oil and gas. But I thought that was a fascinating thing. Now, this is the USS Barb. It was built by Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut. The sub was credited with sinking 17 ships, some 96,000 tons, including Japanese carrier Unyo. And one of the other things that this crew of this ship had the distinction of being the only submarine, actually the only naval ship, period, where members of its crew actually saw action on the Japanese mainland. There were 8 men that came from this submarine, and they went and planted a 55-pound charge with a pressure fuse, where when the locomotive came along and depressed the rail, it would set this fuse off and set off the explosion. These 8 guys went in a rubber boat, set that charge on that railroad track, got out of there, and they weren't but about 200 yards from the shore. And this thing explodes. And they're sitting there just in utter amazement, thinking, we are the only submarine crew in the entire world that's ever done this. Anyway, that's the USS Barb. They had an interesting captain, and they were a great crew, and they were actually presented with a Presidential Unit Citation. I don't know if it was for that or something else, but we built 77 Gato-class submarines like that. And now here are the 3 different classes of fleet aircraft carriers that we had. I already showed you the top one, which is that's the Saratoga. It's an Essex class. The Von Ohm Richard is the mid-sized carrier in the middle, and then the one on the bottom is called the Independence. It's a sister ship to the San Jacinto. Now, we built 140 aircraft carriers during World War II. 140 aircraft carriers. Think of that. We only had like 6 or 7 at the beginning of the war. And they had to not be in port on the day of Pearl Harbor, so they didn't get destroyed. Anyway, here we have what's called a baby flat top and 2 battle wagons. We have the carrier Commencement Bay and Battleship Washington and Battleship Indiana. And I have some interesting information about the Indiana. It saw a lot of action. It was built before the war, but activated in April of '42. Saw action at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Kwajalein, collided with the Washington, and later participated in the Battle of Philippine Sea and Iwo Jima. Who knew that out of the USS Indiana? But there you are. These are heavy cruisers. What I'm basically trying to show you is the myriad of different kinds of ships that were built in these various shipyards. Obviously, a lot of them built nothing but Victory ships, Liberty ships, and big tankers. But these are the kind of specialized naval vessels that they also built. And of these, they built literally dozens, hundreds of cruisers. And these happen to be Salt Lake City, Wichita, and Baltimore, with the carrier Wasp in the background and back here. Here we have light cruiser. What was that?
Way to go, Wichita.
These are light cruisers, the Detroit, the Nashville, the Oakland, and the Montpelier. Here we have older class destroyers. These were probably built in the 30s, but they always needed to be worked on. This was the Shank, the Alwyn, the Porter, and the Drayton. Now, all told, these are 4 different submarines. The S-45, the Pito, the Hake, and the Snapper. And submarines destroyed, they were probably the best investment that we made of everything. They destroyed 1,314 warships, which represented 5.3 million tons of shipping, and 55% of all Axis power warships were destroyed by American subs. On the other hand, we had 55 submarines actually destroyed during World War II. Now you got minecraft. These are mine layers and mine sweepers. You have the mine layer Tolman up here, the minesweeper Ock, and the motor minesweeper YMS 324. A frigate, a yacht, and a corvette. This middle was converted to a warship. The top is the frigate Asheville, and then the bottom is the corvette Temptress. These are patrol craft and sub chasers. Escort PCE 898, sweeper PCS 1448, sub chaser SC 1039, or 36 I should say, and that has a wooden hull. And submarine chasers PC 564. More auxiliaries. Destroyer tender, the Dixie up here, a survey ship, Bowden Hospital ship Consolation. This is called the bow ditch, I should say. Survey ship bow ditch and hospital ship Consolation. More auxiliaries. Attack cargo vessel, Uvadi. Fleet oiler Guadalupe, and attack transport Leonard Wood. auxiliaries, more auxiliaries. This is a barrack ship here at the very top called APL-14. They nicknamed it the Ritz-Carlton. Internal combustion repair engine ship Mindanao and the salvage vessel Gear. Submarine tender Sperry, ocean tug Sioux, and small seaplane tender Duxbury Bay. The bigger beaching craft, and of course we have the LST right here. It's actually launching LCT 185 off its deck. See the smaller ship on the deck of the large ship, and here it slips off and goes on its way. The top is a landing ship dock, Gunston Hall. Those were enormous ships that were both docks and machine ships, like enormous ARLs that were developed later. Now this top ship has a rocket ship, and the rest of these are landing craft to show you all the diversity of, and these are of course small landing craft. And the top one here is an LCVP, like the one that used to be on display here, and the ones that the LST have. Those were mostly made by Higgins Marine Company in New Orleans. And then there are other landing craft here. But of course, the force multipliers of everything during World War II were aircraft for intelligence and every other mission. They were force multipliers. They could allow us to project power of unknown capacity within a 200-mile range of an aircraft carrier. This is the first time that ships actually exchanged fire with one another and were on the other side of the horizon. They couldn't even see one another. But with the improved aircraft, they were force multipliers of enormous magnitude. And of course, some of these are bombers. But the Vought up here at the top, one there. Brigs make the wing sections for this aircraft right here. That part right there was made of brig. And this shows the various managerial groups that were building ships for the maritime mission. These are primarily cargo ships and tankers. These are not naval vessels, but nevertheless, each symbol represents 1 million displacement tons. Okay, Kaiser, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Bethlehem, 1, 2.5. Bechtel, McCone, 1, 2. Todd, 1 3/4. Sun, that was a division of Sun Oil Company. They made mainly tankers. 1,552 tons, 306 ships. Todd was 516. Bechtel was 560. Bethlehem was 621. Kaiser, 1,552, with an additional 6,539,000 by other manufacturers. That included, by the way, plate outfits like Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron. And one of the interesting things is that negotiations about the establishment of that shipyard here at Evansville did not take place until after Pearl Harbor. And, by April, they were breaking ground, setting forms, and by July, they laid the first keel and slipped down the slipways in October. 10 months, well, less than 10 months, more like sentiment, from raw land to building ships. And this is the inventory of steel plate in Liberty Yards. Steel plate in inventory and being fabricated. And notice the supply always outstripped demand, which was pretty amazing all the way through. So once we got that smelting capacity, we didn't play around. We started making ships out of it. Now, this is Kaiser's Swan Island up in Northern California after a snowstorm. And this is the Oregon shipyard at night, which I thought was an incredibly dramatic photograph. And to kind of close this, I have a paragraph in here that I would like to read to give you some idea of what fascinated me about this. Attempts to learn lessons from the past inevitably seek out mistakes, although it is perhaps as difficult to diagnose the causes of a particular failure as to diagnose the reason for success. On the whole, the Maritime Commission's shipbuilding in World War II was a success. The main demand on the commission was that it deliver the ships. In spite of flaws in its administration, the organization headed by Admirals Land and Vickery had ships built with unparalleled speed. It is easy in retrospect to say that they should have done better in this or that. It is difficult to realize how desperately ships were needed in 1941 to 1944, and how unlikely it seemed that then that means could be found to build 19 million tons in 1 year, as was done in 1943. Compared with what has been done before, or with what contemporaries thought it reasonable to expect, the achievement commands admiration. That's it. If you got any questions, I'll be more than happy to try to answer.
Here, hold on. Take a mic here.
Oh.
Say your name.
I'm Don Johnson. Dave, can you talk to, do you have familiarity with the USS Tang, the most successful submarine in World War II?
No, but I was under the impression Barb was, but perhaps not. No, I don't know.
I may have misspoken, but the Tang, some 33 ships, and it met its demise when its last what do they shoot out? Torpedoes, thank you very much. Brain dead. Its last torpedo, it was in the midst of a convoy, already sunk several. Its last torpedo went out, missed, came back and sunk its own ship. The ship was in about 200 something feet of water. The back half went down, the front came up. The surviving crew of about 19 climbed up on the end, and of course they were the absolute fodder for the Japanese guns that were there, not at all pleased with what they'd been doing. I think ultimately they decided the only chance they had was to get back in the ship, close it up, and let it go back down to the bottom. They stayed underwater in that one particular area for so long, knew they had to come back up. 9 men ultimately made it back out through the escape hatch and were kept prisoners by the Japanese. All survived prisoner of war camp and were released after the war. So if you got a minute, look up the USS Tang. There was a book written about it and a particular song composed too, or musical piece called Up From the Bottom or something to that effect. Interesting story, USS Tang.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susie Hansen, and some of you know I'm with the Daughters of the American Revolution. I'm here with another daughter, Debbie Schweitzer. But I wanted to say there were 3 USS Indianas. The first one in 1895, I thought this was fascinating, thanks for my phone, was the first battleship, and it was built in 1895. In 2017, they commissioned a submarine, the USS Indiana, and Daughters of the American Revolution went to that ceremony, ladies from here in Indiana. And I wanted to let you know that it still exists. And it's a brand new sub, more or less. And there's something else I wanted to say about, over 100 companies, we're still producing. Over 100 companies in Indiana submitted parts to the building of that ship, and all the furniture came from Jasper, Indiana. I have one more question for you. So where did the steel from the LSTs come from?
Most of the steel for all of the LST, there were actually 2 yards, Naval Island and Ambridge, in the immediate Pittsburgh area. And just like as with the ammunition that they produced at Chrysler, most of the steel that was used in all of these cornfield shipyards came from Pittsburgh. They serviced Jeffersonville, Evansville, Seneca, Illinois, and the two up there in the 2 yards up there in the Pittsburgh area.
Thank you.
What other questions? We have one up here. You would say your name?
My name is John Brown. I was in the Navy. I was one of the last MSO sailors who spotted it as the minesweeper. MSO's
Yes.
ocean going. The only wooden hulled ships in the Navy in 1969 when they started taking them out.
Wow.
But we'd go to dry dock every 2 years and get recaulked. In other words, they'd rip the caulking out between the outside planks and caulk it again, just like they did back in old Columbus's day.
Well, I was watching a video the other day about PT boats, and with all of the glue and sizing and other stuff that they put between the layers, in the hull and everywhere, that was hardly a wooden boat anymore. But I mean, they were made out of wood, but everything was pretty much sealed up. But yeah, they did build, and they built a few of those too.
Yeah, they built, I think it was 28.
Yeah.
They've made in Waukesha, Wisconsin. The last 4 that were made, we gave to Turkey,
Tell me about
our NATO ally. And I made a lot of cruises on them wooden hull babies, and had V16 Packard engines.
How did they do on the ocean?
They're rough.
I would imagine they would be. I mean, PT boats were, and they're not that much larger, I don't think, really.
We had 55 men, 50 enlisted, and 5 officers. And they were good years. Thanks.
Well, it's pretty amazing when you think that we actually did still have wooden hull ships in World War II, but we had concrete ships. I mean, who knew that? I didn't know it. Do what? Oh, they were fine. They were steel reinforced concrete, just like, and they were made for a short period of time. You know, they weren't made to run for years.
My name's James Woods, and I just wanted to comment that you talked about the Maritime Commission. They also built warships. The Asheville class was built by the Maritime Commission. They built the USS Evansville. And that ship was in the U.S. Navy, so I believe it was the U.S. Navy, the Russian Navy, and then it was the Japanese Navy, and then it was back to the U.S. Navy.
In reading this thing, this book, by the way, is an invaluable book. It's called Ships for Victory, and it was written by a writer by the name of Lane. and I was able to find this at the University of Evansville Library. This was written right after the war, 1946. And, you know, things were still pretty fresh in everybody's mind and stuff. And there's not a lot of history here beyond just the period of time that they focus on. But although it doesn't come right out and say it, I get the impression that Congress and perhaps the Roosevelt administration, now I'm freelancing here, so I'll be honest with you, but I think they routed some of the funding for shipbuilding through the Maritime Commission because they knew war was coming. They knew we were eventually going to be involved in a war. They knew we needed the shipbuilding capacity to meet that threat. And I think they funneled some money through the Maritime Commission to build Navy ships. It would not surprise me in the least, because the reason for this was the enormous anti-war sentiment there was throughout this country, particularly in rural areas. And that particularly affected the Senate, because the Senate was largely ruled by rural interests, whereas the House was more controlled by urban districts, urban interests, where people lived in cities. And I do believe that the Maritime Commission got some of that money that would have ordinarily gone to the Navy to build ships, and they did it for a reason, and it probably was a very justifiable reason. If nothing else, Franklin Roosevelt was pragmatic. And he wasn't a strategic thinker, but he took the advice of other people that he respected and, adhered to what they said. And he had a lot of good, really smart people behind him, even though some of them were communists. That's a story for another day.
First of all, thank you, David. That was an excellent presentation. A lot of research work went into that. We appreciate that. One thing that's interesting about the aircraft carrier, you mentioned, they learn by their mistakes or learn as they went along. And the evolution of that aircraft carrier portion of it's very interesting. They weren't aircraft carrier, they put decks on top of existing ships initially. And then they found out that a single runway wasn't such a good idea because people landing on it could wipe out the aircraft at the other end. So they went to eventually an angled deck.
Right.
The other big improvement that they found out during World War II is it was very hazardous to leave those aircraft on the deck.
Right.
So they put side elevators eventually
Right.
on those ships to bring them up. So there was a lot of evolution that came out of World War II with aircraft carriers.
Well, and on the Essex class carrier by itself, they had a short runway and they had a long runway. Because, well, obviously they could handle more aircraft easier. I mean, you're talking 82 aircraft. That's a lot of airplanes. That's a lot of fuel. Think of that. Every one of those airplanes probably carries 150 gallons of fuel. And they got to be full before they take off, And that again was another of the blessings that we had, is we had oil and gas. We had the capacity to produce oil, and we did produce oil, a lot of it. And Japanese didn't have that. Most of their battleships stayed in port because they couldn't afford the fuel to put in to send them somewhere because they used so much fuel when they moved, And the Germans the same way. Most of their capital ships stayed anchored off of Norway in the North Atlantic, or in the North Sea rather. They just stayed up there. They didn't go anywhere because they didn't have fuel. they did not have the fuel to put in these enormous ships to move them around to the extent that we were able to. You know, we just kept building ships and kept building ships and filling them up with fuel.
I'm glad Mike went for it.
Well, I don't want to get into that, but as you can tell, this is an enormous topic, and you can go on and on with it because, but it is another of the incredible stories of accomplishment that, with just a little bit of reading, you can discover on your own. And there's all these quirky little things like those 2 battleships being built in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I mean, who knew that? But it's just one of those strange little quirks that you learn. And when you learn those kind of things, you want to share them with people. So thank you all so much for...
One more question.
Oh, another question? All right. Okay, I'm sorry.
Last question.
I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Mark Fehrenbacher. A bit of trivia concerning the shipyard here. I went to the Old North High School for what they call T&I classes, you know, machine shop, welding. And back then, where they had the industrial arts, it was called mechanic arts building. And I don't know if this is truth or legend, but supposedly the welding machines we used at North in the late 70s was the same welding machines that you used at the shipyard.
I've heard that, and some of the industrial lathes that were over here at the Republic, they floated around here locally and finally ended up with the school corporation again. And they had a big auction, and Hunky Blue over in Henderson ended up with a lot of that stuff. I guess he bought it for scrap price. But he bought a bunch of that stuff, just truckloads of it. Yeah. I should have known you'd ask. I think it survived the war. I'm not sure. I believe it did. Well, my uncle didn't get killed.
My dad was on that ship, and George H.W.
Yeah, George H.W. and my uncle and apparently other people from around here, I guess. I mean, that's the thing, is it was the luck of the draw. You didn't know who you were going to be serving with because it was pretty random the way they selected crews. No idea. So many of these ships, you know, LSTs, they gave them away. They gave them away to foreign governments. They ended up all over the world. Philippines had a bunch of them. China had a bunch of them. You know, I don't know. Believe it or not, a lot of that shipping, see, that would have been excess after the war because they were escort carriers. They were small. They weren't armor plated. So they were actually kind of dangerous. And we didn't need them. And they probably sold it for scrap. And probably eventually got sold for scrap. I'm not certain. You can look up the service activities of every single ship online. So you can look that up for yourself if you want to find out what happened. They did come back to the West Coast. I do know that. But what happened after that, I have no idea. Yeah. Thanks, y'all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Outstanding job. So, upcoming events, the next one is Ted Zucker about our best ally in World War II and Hitler's mistake. He helped us out more than he intended, I guarantee you that. We have several more episodes during World War II, the beginning of the EAA, and thank you for coming. And please sign up for upcoming events. Memberships are available, and don't forget about the gift shop. And thank you all for coming, and see you in a couple of weeks.